Tired of bloating, fatigue and sluggish digestion? Meet your gut's new best friend, NutriHealth 365's microbiome supplement. Restore balance, boost immunity, and feel amazing from the inside out. Smart delay release capsules. Real results. Gut health just got personal.
Almost a month on from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we're going to look at new information that is breaking this week to do with that. We're going to talk about the ban UK drivers are facing for driving petrol or diesel cars. Not in 2030, but a little bit sooner than that. Companies House here are trying to bring in digital ID for company directors through the back door. And comedian Lenny Henry is talking about reparations for all black people in the UK. That plus more on Trending. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. So it's the 8th of October today. We're just under a month since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and silence. There's been a wall of silence pretty much since the day they did that press conference and announced that they had Tyler Robinson in custody. A couple of days following that, they spoke about information. I say information very loosely, that was coming out about him that all pointed the fingers at him, or at least made you want to point the fingers at him. And then there's been basically a wall of silence. There's so many anomalies, yet pretty much nobody, with the exception of Candace Owens, seems to be asking any more questions about it. And that includes Turning Point USA and his wife. For me, when his wife did that speech and said that she forgave Tyler Robinson at that memorial, which was a bizarre memorial in so many ways, that was her essentially accepting that she believed Tyler Robinson did it and shutting down any discussion about the fact that he didn't do it. When you don't need to be a brain of the world or a rocket scientist to know that there is so many questions that have yet to be answered. There's lots of videos that point the finger at lots of different things that make you go, hang on, why has that happened? Why are they there? What's that? How's he done that? There's situations to do with the gun being taken apart, then put back together. How's he walking with such a big weapon? How's he taking it apart so quickly, but then put it back together for it to be found? He talked about a drop. So a drop means you're dropping it to someone. So who's that someone? There's so many questions surrounding this. The bizarre videos that were put up following, the absolutely bizarre memorial, the very odd situation where people are doing his show on his behalf and using his language. And, his wife, I know everyone grieves differently, but his wife just a few days afterwards smiling and laughing and saying she's so excited. It's just, to me, it's so bizarre from start to finish. The whole situation is so bizarre from start to finish. And ultimately, I feel very sorry I feel obviously sorry for him and the children as well, that they've had to go through that. But there doesn't seem to be this outpouring of heartache or this outpouring of questioning, which you would expect. If somebody has just shot a loved one, a close friend, a colleague, a husband, a partner, you would be like a dog with a bone trying to uncover and understand what, who, when, why, and how this happened. But there's been a wall of silence when it's come to that. There's been very little questioning, if any, from very close supposed friends and allies of him. And this official story has been accepted without question by pretty much everyone, apart from, as I say, Candace Owens and maybe another few. But why? If this guy was a close friend of these people, surely you'd want justice for them. You wouldn't just want to blame a patsy. Hence why people like Martin Luther King's family, they know and believe and have said outright they know James Earl Ray didn't kill him. They know it wasn't him. Bobby Kennedy's family, including RFK Jr., know full well Sirhan didn't kill Bobby Kennedy. They question it. They call it out. Whereas in this case, it's just been accepted with very little investigation, basically no questioning. Is that what you'd really do? For me, if this was a loved one of mine, if there was one question in an otherwise watertight story, I'd want that question answered before I'd let it rest. Whereas with this, there is so many questions, and they've all just stopped being asked. For me, what this has highlighted is a number of things which we'll dive into. The family aspect I do find very bizarre. And I'll make it clear, I'm not making accusations, I'm just saying it's bizarre. And I'm even seeing people who at first were very much on the side of the official story and now going, this is weird. This is weird. And it is. It's very strange. But the whole point of the alternative anti-establishment media, if you like, of which Charlie would have considered himself part, I'm sure. Daily Wire have considered themselves part, and various others. Alex Jones would have once considered himself part. Have, over the years, always questioned official narratives that have been put to them, particularly people like Alex Jones. Questioned official stories about 9/11, about 7/7s, about weapons of mass destruction, about the Gulf of Tonkin, about all those different events. Yet on this, they haven't even asked one question. They've bought the official story and therefore become propaganda and mouthpieces for the official narrative. So rather than being alternative media, you're actually more belligerently the mainstream media on this, because you know that your base and your viewership is going to care more about this issue than people viewing CNN. You know the people that are going to watch Daily Wire, the people that are going to watch InfoWars, the people that are going to watch those types of programs are probably right-wing conservatives in America, and therefore Charlie Kirk would have been a big deal to them, a big name, a big face, and they would have been very, very concerned by his assassination at what that means for the conservative movement. So as a result, what you say really matters. How you sell what's happened really matters. How you explain what's happened really matters. Who you blame. Whereas the viewers of CNN and MSNBC and those mainstream news outlets, there'll be people watching that who don't care. There'll be people watching that cheering. There'll be people watching that who are just not that bothered. So what they say almost doesn't matter as much. But the alternative, or right-wing patriotic, if you want to call it Christian right, of which he was very much a leader in young people of, what you say there absolutely matters. And you've sold them the official's narrative without question. Is that what you do to protect the legacy of somebody that you care about? All these people eulogizing over him have done nothing to get him justice. So that begs the bigger question. Is this whole thing just a massive game, a massive theatre? Well, I think it is, yes. And I don't mean that in the sense of I think the whole thing's staged. I've not seen enough evidence to make me go there, but I've seen a lot that makes me absolutely not believe Tyler Robinson shot him, absolutely believe that there would have had to have been involvement from within people, from people very close to him. There would have had to have been for this to work. And also the fact that the narrative was so quickly and so easily believed and so little questioning was done from anyone around him, that again shows to me that people around him must have had to have been involved, because they could have been shouting from the rooftops here. People that were stood surrounding him in that tent that then took him to hospital, they'd have been able to have a good insight into what happened, because they were right next to the event. They were right next to it. Not saying they knew what happened, but they'd had a better insight than some. But all of a sudden, that wasn't a crime scene anymore. And as I say, basically no questioning was done. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things related to this that Candace Owens has put up over the last few days. So 48 hours before he died, he was having a group chat, a WhatsApp group chat, and Candace Owens has released these text messages, and Turning Point USA have had to come out yesterday and acknowledge that these are correct, these are true and real, they're not faked. Where he's talking about another Jewish donor dropping out of Turning Point support, $2 million a year, because he won't deplatform Tucker Carlson, and he says this Charlie Kirk I'm referring to, says he's thinking of inviting Candace to whatever event that they are discussing. And he then goes on to say that he's had enough of being bullied, and he's thinking he's left with no other choice than to drop this pro-Israel support stance that he has and that Turning Point USA has. The reply, which doesn't have a name attached to it, advises him not to do that and not to do anything impulsive. 48 hours later, the guy is dead. Within minutes of him being dead, the Jerusalem Post break the story, despite being thousands of kilometres, thousands of miles away. The Prime Minister of the country of Israel then goes on a media tour saying he didn't do it. They then name a square in Tel Aviv after Charlie Kirk. They then bring out this whole official narrative, which everybody buys hook, line and sinker. You then have lots of videos released where Charlie Kirk was talking about Jewish donors and talking about October 7th and the likelihood that there was a stand-down order. And you add all those factors together. You then add together who's taken over Turning Point USA and the involvement now of Ben Shapiro, who is as rabid a Zionist, Israel first, as anyone on the planet. And you do start to come up with a number of questions. So why aren't those questions being asked by his immediate family and by Turning Point USA? As I say, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. That's a genuine question. Why are those not being asked? Do you want justice or don't you? You can eulogize about somebody. You can have a picture of them. You can talk about them. You can do all that. But when it comes to it, are you really prepared to do what needs to be done to get justice? Which is to refuse to buy, clearly, a load of BS as the official story. It seems not. So why? Why is that? And this brings me on to the final point on this. Candace has released a video this morning, which I'll play you now, where she's talking about a dream that she had over the weekend.
Like I just said, had a vivid dream this weekend, and Charlie came to me and he told me that he was betrayed. And so for me, you don't have to believe that, but I do believe that. And it was the immediate sense I got, actually. And I don't know who exactly it is that betrayed him, but I also felt in the dream that it is soon going to be revealed, that it's actually inevitable that it is going to be revealed, that there is nothing and no one that is going to stop the truth from coming out, and it is going to have international consequences. Take that to the bank. Quote me on that. Okay,
so we've all had vivid dreams where things have happened and things have come to us, whether they be ideas, insights, or even warnings. I've genuinely had dreams in the past when new people have come into my life and been like, which has made me re-question whether they need to be in my life. But, you know, that's not an uncommon thing that she's describing there. But what I find interesting is where she's talking about betrayal, and he had to be betrayed. If you look at most political assassinations that we have seen over the last 100 years, whether it be your JFKs, your Bobby Kennedys, your Martin Luther Kings, your Malcolm X's, even your John Lennons, even your Princess Diana's, who was assassinated, even though they say she wasn't. Almost every single time, there is evidence of betrayal from within, whether that be security guards, whether that be close allies, whether that be confidants, whoever it may be. There is evidence of infiltration and therefore corruption and betrayal from within. It's a really simple way to do it. You get close to somebody and then you can keep an eye on them, and then when that time comes, you've already got somebody close to that person to do whatever needs to be done. You know, it's a very simple principle. So people have handlers, people have advisors that are a little bit more than advisors that they're obviously close to, that will give them advice on policy and ways to conduct themselves, people to interview and things like that. And all of a sudden, those people are obviously going to be very, very close to whoever the person is. And as a result, they're going to have their ear, they're going to have their trust, they're going to have the faith of them, that they maybe are the right person to be around them, or that they are there for their best interests, or whatever the mission of whatever it might be. What a great place to be able to manipulate from, and also, you know, make sure things are what they need to be in terms of lowering security, in terms of making sure somebody is in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, we saw that with a number of different people over the years. So, Bobby Kennedy, for example, it was his security that led him through that kitchen, knowing what was going to happen. A new security guard that had only been employed very recently, or potentially even for that night, if I remember rightly. It's very clear that infiltration and betrayal from within is very common in cases like this. And not only do I have a lot of questions about what happened and how it happened to him, I've got a lot of questions about what's happened in the aftermath, which has been completely bizarre. No post-mortem. His body was released incredibly quickly. Those videos that went up that really didn't look real. You had Air Force 2 and JD Vance on the way within minutes, it felt like. And it was all very controlled. The entire aftermath was controlled to such an extreme level that it makes you ask the question, what were you trying to hide? Why are you trying to control this situation so much? And also what it does and what it's done, final point on this before we move on, is it obviously created a massive emotional response from so many people across the world who were affected by this. I didn't know Charlie Kirk, but I remember the night it happened, and me and my wife were sat and we got a few messages about, have you seen this? And then we looked on Twitter and those absolutely graphic videos were up, and I immediately sat there and thought, his kids were there, man. And you put yourself in that position a little bit and think, how would you feel if you'd seen that happen to your parents, or if that happened to you and your kids were watching? And I've watched many videos, a lot more videos since his death of Charlie than I had before while he was alive, and I'm finding myself agreeing with more and more of what he said. Not, the fundamental religious stuff. That's not an area of interest for me, and obviously not the very staunch Israeli support, which was wavering, obviously. But I find myself agreeing with a lot of what he says about family dynamics and about, what's going to bring true meaning and happiness to a man's life, for example. And I find myself actually feeling more and more sorry for him as this time goes on, because in that video where Candace says he feels he was betrayed, he was ultimately betrayed. And I look at him and I don't know him, but I know people who did, and I know people who staunchly disagree with a lot of his political and religious views. However, said that he was genuinely honest and lovely and a sincere person who, whether you believed what he believed, he genuinely believed it. And he genuinely felt that way. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a show. It wasn't done for popularity or money or fame or anything else. It was done because he genuinely felt that was true. And maybe that explains why he had wavering support for Israel, because he was starting to question genuinely his stance on it. And obviously they couldn't have that. So I feel he obviously was betrayed. And he's certainly been betrayed since. Because the fact that people close to him are asking no questions and have just accepted this official story shows, for me, contempt to his memory. And I know this video is probably going to anger a lot of people and get me a lot of heat, but I don't care, because I'm saying what I believe to be true, which is, if somebody you love is murdered in such an extreme, graphic way in front of your kids, in front of his kids, in front of a large group of people, with videos that are going to be on the internet forever, and his death is going to be used to affect political changes, affect policy changes, and cause wider conversations across the country, you need to make sure that the person that's in custody for doing it is the person who did it. It should be surely an obligation and a emotional quest to make sure that you get justice for your loved one, or your friend, or your colleague. Yet that's not what we've seen in the aftermath of his assassination. And to me, that gives me even more questions to ask. Even more spidey senses going off that people close to him knew exactly what was going to happen and must have been involved in some way to either facilitate it or involved in it being done in the first place. I don't see how this happens without that. And I certainly don't see how the lack of questioning in the aftermath happens without that. I've made myself a target, but I don't care, like I say. I think the job of anyone in this field is to say what you believe to be right, regardless of the consequences. And I'm saying what I believe to be right. And if I'm wrong and I'm completely off the target, I will sincerely hold my hands up and say, I got that one wrong. But I'm going to put it out there very confidently and say, there's a lot more to know about this, and there's a lot more to know about why questions are not being asked. Well, thank you very much for tuning in with me if you're on Twitter or YouTube. We're going to carry on the rest of the show on Iconic. We're going to talk about the new ban that they're talking about on diesel and petrol cars here in the UK. We're also going to talk about digital ID through the back door and how all black people should get reparations, according to comedian Lenny Henry. Head over to iconic.com by clicking the link in the description below, and I shall see you over there.